Reading is going to come from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 1 and verse 7. Listen to the word of God. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. This is a profoundly tragic scene in Job chapter 2. I don't know if anyone is prepared for what happened to Job. His wife saw him and was so horrified and upset by what she saw that she asked him this question: "Are you still trying to hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die." Verse 11 tells us that Job's friends heard about what happened to him and came to confront him. But even they were not prepared for the situation they walked into. The text says they could hardly recognize him. They were so overwhelmed by what they saw that they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights in utter silence. What happened that caused such a strong response from Job's wife and his friends? What is it that they saw? Well, the text tells us that he is covered in boils from head to toe. And what is so tragic about this scene is that it comes on the heels of losing all of his possessions. Chapter 1 tells us about all the oxen, asses, sheep, camels, and servants that he had. Worse yet, he lost all of his children. At this low point in chapter 1, the text tells us that Job got up and he tore his clothes and he fell down to the ground. He worshiped. He says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. Blessed be the name of the Lord." He did not curse God. But in chapter 2, he gets hit with another round of adversity. Adversity hits home in a very, very personal and powerful way. The task proved so difficult that Job sat down in silence. So my sermon title is "Sitting in the Ashes," because that's what it is that Job was compelled to do. In the first wave of adversity in chapter 1, he worshiped. In the second phase in chapter 2, when he experienced incredible adversity, he sat down in silence. He sat down in the ashes, not wanting to speak evil of God, but also not really having the words to describe what he was feeling and the difficulty of the situation in which he found himself. Which makes me want to ask you a question on this morning. Have you ever dealt with a situation that was so difficult that you did not have the words to describe? You could not explain how difficult it was or how it made you feel. And so, as I think about what it means to be an African American in 2020, we're in one of those kind of moments. I know I'm in one of those kind of moments. And it's why, many times I've always thought, how is it possible for our ancestors to survive the horrors of slavery and segregation when today so many in the African American community are unable to? And it's because they picked up certain values and practices that gave them the strength to be able to go through unspeakable horrors like being enslaved. When I was a kid, I learned something from some of the gray heads that used to live in my neighborhood that I believe has been passed down in the African American community. We all know that what statistics tell us is that African Americans have the highest rates of hypertension today, but that was not always the case. Because I used to watch my grandparents and my uncles and my aunts sitting on the porch in silence. They didn't feel the need to say a word. They would just sometimes sit in silence. And I think that's really an act of faith. It's not an act of surrender. It's an act of defiance. They learn how to just sit with situations. And if you, my brothers and my sisters, if you're going to have a faith that's going to survive the turbulent times in which we live, I think the lesson that I've learned from my grandparents, my uncles, and my aunts that I'm sure they have saw mirrored from the very, very generation that came out of slavery is that they've passed on the value and the spiritual skill and tenacity to be able to sit in difficult situations. And that's what Job was doing. He reached such a profound place of suffering that he just sat down in his situations. And this is why I like to juxtapose and hold this Job 2 passage in tension with the passage out of Ecclesiastes. Because the wisdom writings in the Hebrew Bible, these are writings that help us to think about the complexities of life, the challenges of faith, and the importance of living in the fear of God. In particular, the book of Job is written to help us to think about suffering that is not deserved. Sometimes that's just descriptive and indicative of the lives in which minorities live. They experience suffering that they do not deserve. It's just simply because of the color of their skin and the history of this country. So how do you deal with trouble that comes upon you for reasons that you cannot figure out? This is why I love this text. It teaches that sometimes we just have to sit down in those situations. Because the Ecclesiastes text tells us that to everything there is a time and a season for every purpose under heaven. That there's a time to speak and there is a time to be silent. And I know in the age of social media where everybody feels they have to say something, that sometimes you don't need to say anything about your situation. Learn how to sit with your situations. Listen to what another piece of writing that comes out of the wisdom tradition says. It's in the Psalms. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." You know, learning how to just sit with your situations, to be at peace with yourself, even though you don't understand why things are happening, or you don't even know how you should respond. Learning how to sit with your situations is a very, very helpful Christian discipline. The last thing I want to say is that sitting in the ashes of your situation is an act of faith. It's basically saying I don't need to jump for every quick answer or easy solution or quick fix for complex situations in which we find ourselves. We're dealing with systemic and structural issues of injustice, and there are no quick fixes. So learning how to just sit with our situations, I think, instills discipline and the spiritual gift of patience and faith to kind of walk the long road to a better day that's in front of us. So my brothers and my sisters, I don't know what it is that you are dealing with. I don't know what it is that you are going through. But I just want to remind you that something that Job did as simply as just sitting down in the ashes of his situation is something that I think we need to do in 2020. Take a break from Facebook, take a break from Twitter, take a little break from Instagram. Just sit down in your situation. Don't always try to, get a quick answer to your situation. Learn how to just sit with it. Sometimes you just got to let things unfold. Sometimes you have to wait for the wisdom of God to reveal itself. And then get up and continue to move forward with your life. I thank God for the opportunity to be able to encourage you to sit down in the ashes. You be blessed.